Hi, my name is Greg O'Malley. I'm a professor here in the history department at UC Santa Cruz, and my research focuses on early American history with an emphasis on slavery and the slave trade. I wrote a book called Final Passages, The Intercolonial Slave Trade of British America, and what that book does is focus on trafficking of people after the infamous Middle Passage across the Atlantic. So while most studies of the slave trade focus on the Atlantic crossing from Africa to the Americas, my research sort of starts where that other research ends, with sales in an American port of arrival for African people, and argues that many of the people buying captives were not plantation owners from nearby, but were merchant speculators who put people back on yet other ships and moved them all throughout the Americas looking for profitable ways to take advantage of the slave trade. And that research on the slave trade connects to some interesting experiential learning opportunities for students here at UCSC in a couple different ways. One of the research projects that I'm involved in is the Slave Voyages project, and in particular within that, the Intra-American Slave Trade Database. And what we do at Slave Voyages is try to identify through historical records all of the voyages, the historic voyages that moved enslaved people from one place to another in the Atlantic world. And so we have both a transatlantic slave trade database, looking at movements of people from Africa to the Americas, and an intra-American database that looking at voyages that move people from one place in the Americas to another. The Slave Voyages website is free to use for the public. People can access the databases online. People can download the data to work with themselves offline, and it's all free. It's available in 3 different languages to researchers all around the world. So it's a very widely used public resource. And there's a couple different ways for students to connect with that research at UCSC. One of those is a new class that I'm designing that'll be offered in the 2023-24 academic year for the first time, which is a class on the history of the slave trade. And in that class, of course, like in traditional classes, we'll learn about, through lectures and readings, the history of the slave trade, but then there will also be an experiential learning part where students will conduct research that they can contribute to this Slave Voyages slave trade database project. So rather than just sort of learning about the slave trade, students will be contributing knowledge and research to a database that's a public resource. That will help students build a few really practical, tangible skills. One is, of course, research skills, right? We'll talk about how to find new information, what kinds of sources can one look at to try to identify new information for a database like this. How does one access those sources? But then also really practical skills about how do you manage data? How do you track or log what you find to make it usable in the future? These databases of tens of thousands of voyages for which we track hundreds of variables of information is a very complicated data management project. So students working on these kinds of projects will also get an insight into that. And that's a very transferable skill. There's a lot of data management in the healthcare field. There's a lot of data management in various kinds of for-profit businesses. Information is power, as they say, and so learning how to manage a large, complex data set and make it searchable, make that data accessible is a really important skill. And I hope that this class will help students develop those skills, whether they go on to apply those skills in history or some completely different field. I think it could be useful either way. For students who take a real strong interest in it, another thing that creates an opportunity for students is in summer of 2024, I'm creating a paid student internship program where students will be able to earn some money in the summer over several weeks working on research that will contribute to the database. So that class will hopefully be a nice feeder for some particularly interested students to get more involved and get a real research opportunity. And if we can raise some funds for travel, in addition to doing work from UCSC in the summer on the database project, we'll travel to an archive together to look at original historical documents in an archive and try to gather new material, document new voyages for the Slave Voyages database project. And then another exciting component of that summer internship program is that I recently received a grant from something called the UC-HBCU project, which is a partnership between the University of California and historically black colleges and universities. And that will create an internship program for undergraduate students from historically black colleges and universities to come to UCSC in the summer of 2024 to participate in this paid student internship program. My hope is that this first year will sort of serve as a proof of concept that will allow us to pursue funding to make these more sustained programs working towards the future. Because I think these student experiential learning opportunities tend to be most powerful when students can try different things out, experiment. That's one of the great things about being at college. But also if a project really catches their imagination, to keep building on that foundation and go really in depth with some of these opportunities really sets students up to make it part of a career. Whether it's following the research track and the actual subject matter of a project they take an interest in, or just building on those skills and really taking that knowledge to a deep level so that they can apply those skills in some other field in a very sophisticated way.